The ring was small enough that she had worn it all morning without thinking of it, tucked beneath the neckline of her gray dress on its plaited cord, carried the way she always carried it, close to the skin and out of sight. It was only when she shifted the stack of pressed linens from her right arm to her left in the upper corridor outside the blue sitting room that the cord slipped and the ring came free and hung for a single exposed moment against the pale linen in her hand. Lady Helena Fenwick was coming from the opposite direction. Nora did not see the older woman stop walking. She did not see the color drain from Lady Helena's face, or the fine-boned hand that reached for the corridor wall as though the floor had shifted beneath her. She did not see the gray eyes fix on the garnet ring with an expression she would not have had a word for, something between grief and the recognition of a thing believed lost to the ground. She heard only the stillness, that particular stillness, the kind that gathers in a room or a corridor when something has happened that no one has yet named, settled over the passage as completely as snowfall. Nora looked up. Lady Helena's gaze was on her hand. The ring caught the morning light from the corridor window. A small oval garnet, dark red as old wine, set in a plain gold band with no ornamentation and no inscription that anyone could read from the outside. Nora had worn it for 11 years, without knowing its history. She had worn it for precisely 4 hours this morning. Lady Helena looked at her. The expression on her face was not one Nora had ever been the cause of before. She thought, for one cold moment, that she was about to be dismissed. She did not yet know what the Dowager was seeing. She did not know then that the ring had once been placed on a dead woman's hands, that it had been pressed between folded fingers and lowered into Fenwick churchyard on a gray April morning 19 years ago, that it had been the most specific act of grief Lady Helena had ever witnessed, the giving of that ring, and that she had believed without question it had gone into the earth with the woman who wore it. What Nora knew was this: her mother was dead. The ring was the only thing she had left of her. She stood in the corridor with her armful of linens and looked back at the Dowager and waited. Lady Helena said nothing. She pressed her hand flat against the wall. She passed Nora without a word and turned the corner toward the east wing. The linens did not shake in Nora's arms. She was proud of that. She would not understand what had happened until much later. She tucked the ring beneath her neckline and went back to work. Nora Whitfield had come to Fenwick Hall in the second week of November, hired through an agency in Bath that placed respectable women in respectable households, on the understanding that the position was temporary, that the regular undermaid had gone to tend a sick relative in Yorkshire, and that someone with a steady hand and a quiet manner was required for the winter quarter. The agency had given her a character reference, and she had given the agency 3 years of work at a small house in Dorset, and no one had asked about anything before that, because there was nothing before that anyone found worth asking after. She was, to the agency and to Fenwick Hall alike, a woman with good references and serviceable training, and no particular history, which was near enough to the truth that she had never needed to correct it. The ring was what she had not mentioned, nor the sealed letter that had come with it, wrapped together in a piece of oilcloth inside the small box a solicitor's clerk had pressed into her hands when she was 12 years old, the morning after her mother was buried in a churchyard in Somerset. The clerk had said the items were her mother's effects, that there was no estate, no property, no other provision, and that the charity school where she had been placed would continue to receive her until she was old enough to work. He had delivered this information without cruelty and without particular gentleness, and had left her alone in a room smelling of ink and winter damp with the oilcloth bundle on her knees. She had not opened the letter. That was the truth of it, and she had carried it for 11 years without opening it, because she knew once she read it, she could not unread it. and the letter was all she had of her mother's voice, and she was afraid of finding in it something that would give her grief another shape she did not know how to hold. The ring she wore on a cord, because the solicitor had told her it was hers, and because it was the only beautiful thing she owned. Fenwick Hall was the largest house she had worked in. The stone was old and dark, the corridors broad enough for two people to pass without touching if they were careful, the ceilings high and plastered and cold in the morning. There was a full household staff of 17 souls below stairs, and Mrs. Price, who managed them all with the particular economy of a woman who had learned that silence and a set mouth cost nothing and bought considerable authority. Mrs. Price had looked Nora over on the morning she arrived, the way a woman looks at a bolt of cloth before she decides if it is worth the price. "She is adequate," she had said to the head footman, Mr. Garton, while Nora stood a yard away with her bag in her hands. "A maid is a maid, and a temporary position does not require better than adequate. See, she knows the rooms." That was the first time Nora heard herself described that way. A maid is a maid. She had understood it was not addressed to her. She had understood it was meant for her to hear. She went to see the rooms. The Earl was a person she encountered only at the edges of her work. He was 34, and he had been abroad, she learned from the kitchen talk, for nearly 4 years, and he had returned 3 months ago. And no one below stairs seemed to know precisely why he had gone or what had brought him back. He had a manner of occupying a room that left no warmth in it after he had departed. He was not unkind. He was careful with his orders and exact in his requirements, and he looked through his servants rather than at them, which was a form of dignity, Nora understood, that ran in both directions. She saw him the first time at the foot of the staircase on her 3rd morning, reading a letter as he descended, and he did not look up. And she pressed herself to the wall to let him pass, and the only evidence that he had registered her presence at all was the slight inclination of his head. She saw him the second time in the library. She had gone to fetch a volume of natural philosophy that Lady Cecily had requested, and Lady Cecily was the only person in Fenwick Hall who had made any request of Nora that felt like it came from a person rather than a position. She was 17 and fair-haired and prone to illness, and when she was confined to her rooms, she read at a pace that suggested she intended to consume the entire library before spring. Nora had developed the habit of bringing her books along with the morning tray, because the look on Lady Cecily's face when a new volume arrived was one of the more uncomplicated pleasures the house had to offer. The book was on the 3rd shelf, which required the small library ladder. She was halfway up the ladder when she heard someone enter behind her. She did not come down. She finished retrieving the volume and descended with her back to the room, and turned to find the Earl standing at the desk, which she had not expected him to be using at this hour, and he was looking at her, which she had not expected either. "That book," he said, "is in the wrong section." She looked at it. Lady Cecily requested it. A pause that did not resolve into anything. He looked at the volume in her hands. "She has finished the 2nd one already. She is quicker than the catalogue allows for," Nora said, and then stopped, because it was not her place to observe anything about the speed at which Lady Cecily read, and she waited for the slight correction that a remark like that deserved. It did not come. He looked at her instead, and the look was brief but not absent. And then he turned back to his correspondence. "Leave it with her," he said. She went. She was at the door before she heard him, quiet and without looking up, say that she had been confined to her rooms for 3 days. "If she requires more volumes, you may apply to Garton." It was not warmth. It was information delivered with efficiency. She carried the volume down the corridor and thought, with a restraint she had learned over 11 years, that it was possible for information to carry warmth inside it without showing it on the surface. She had not thought that about a man before. She was careful, after that, not to think it again. Cecily's fever came on a Tuesday, the last week of November, with the speed that illness arrives in slight people who overextend themselves in cold houses. By 9 in the evening, she was burning. By 9:30, the footman dispatched for the apothecary had returned to say the roads were iced and impassable, and the apothecary would come in the morning. Mrs. Price organized the available remedies and left the night to the housemaids with instructions not to wake the household unless absolutely necessary. Nora was not technically assigned to Lady Cecily's care. Her duties ended at 8. She went to the young woman's room at 9:30 because she had heard the cough through the corridor wall, and what she found when she opened the door was not a young woman who needed efficient service, but a girl who was frightened. "It is only a fever," Nora said, which was the thing to say. "I know," Cecily said. "My mother died of only a fever." Nora sat down. She stayed through the night. She changed the cloths when they warmed and applied fresh ones at the temples and at the wrists, the way she had learned at 12 in the charity school sick room. And she read aloud from the natural philosophy book when Cecily asked, and was silent when she did not. At 2 in the morning, Cecily's temperature dropped enough that her breathing changed, and Nora let herself exhale. At some point between midnight and 1, she became aware that she was not alone in the doorway. She did not turn. She heard the sound of a person standing still, and then the sound of them not entering, and then silence, and then, very quietly, the retreat of footsteps toward the east wing. By morning, Cecily was cooler. By noon, she was asking for another book. If you are moved to leave a quiet word in the comments, we would be glad of it. These stories are built for the evenings, for the people who need them. And they keep going because of you. The letter had been inside its oilcloth for 11 years and 2 months. Nora did not open it on a day of significance. She opened it on an unremarkable Wednesday morning in the first week of December, in the linen room off the upper corridor, because she had sat down for a moment with the ring in her hand, and found, without having decided, that she was already unfolding the paper. Her mother's hand was careful and small. It was the hand of a woman who had learned to write as a secondary skill, not as a native one, and who had practiced it with the same determination she appeared to have brought to everything. My dear Nora, you will read this when I am gone, and you will not have me to ask, and so I will try to tell you what is necessary. The ring is yours. It was given to me by a good woman who could not keep me near her, and I wore it every day of my life since. It is not a grand thing. It came from a good house and from a kind heart, and you should wear it without shame. I came to that house when you were 3 years old, and I served there for 2 years, which were among the best years of my life. The family did not know you existed. There was no reason for them to know. The woman of that house knew my name, and I knew her. And she was not as cold as the world had taught her to be. I am not able to tell you the full account, only that you are owed nothing by anyone and everything by yourself. That is what I had, and it served me well enough, and I hope it serves you better. Wear the ring. Remember me. Your mother, Agnes Whitfield. There was nothing else. Nora sat for a long time with the letter in her lap. The linen room was cold and smelled of lavender and pressed cotton, and she sat in it for a long time, and when she finally moved, she put the ring on her finger, because her mother had told her to. And she was done not doing the things her mother had asked. She forgot she was wearing it. That was the simple truth of what happened next. She forgot, in the aftermath of reading a letter that had waited 11 years, that the ring was on her finger rather than on its cord. She stood from the linen room and gathered the sheets and walked out into the corridor, where she encountered Mrs. Price. Mrs. Price's eyes went to the ring with the speed of a woman who had spent 30 years cataloging what belonged where. "What is that?" Mrs. Price said. It was not a question. "A ring," Nora said. "My mother's." Mrs. Price looked at her with the expression she reserved for arguments she had already won. "Maids do not wear rings. A maid is a maid, and you will remove it." Nora removed it. She put it on its cord and tucked it under her neckline, and picked up the linens and went back to work. She did not know that Mrs. Price had seen the garnet. She did not know that the garnet was distinctive, in the way that simple things are distinctive. A small oval stone in a plain gold band, the kind of ring that is unrepeatable, not because of its value, but because of its particularity. She did not know that by afternoon the ring had been described in the servants' hall to Mr. Garton and to 2 of the under-footmen, and that Mr. Garton had thought nothing of it. She did not know that Mrs. Price had gone to Lady Helena with a concern about a maid wearing jewelry above her station. She did not know what Lady Helena had said when she heard the description. The first she understood of any of it was when Mr. Garton came to her in the linen room the following morning and told her, with the careful face of a man delivering uncomfortable information, that Lord Fenwick wished to speak with her in the study at 10:30. In 31 years, Lady Helena Fenwick had given away only one ring. She had pressed it between the folded hands of a woman named Agnes Whitfield on the morning of Agnes's burial, in this village, in this churchyard, in the April of 1799. Agnes had been in her employ for 2 years, had come with a small child she had said nothing of, and whom the household had never seen, and had died of a stitching fever contracted in the course of the household's winter illness, in which she had nursed 3 other servants back to health while exhausting her own. Helena had loved her with the particular love one has for a person who does for others at cost to themselves without being asked. She had given her the ring because Agnes had admired it once, with the controlled admiration of someone who knows a thing is beautiful and does not expect to touch it. Helena had put it on her hands because she could not bear to wear it after, and had believed it gone. She sent for Nora on the morning after Mrs. Price's report, not to the study, but to the small parlor off the east wing, which was her own private room, and which the household knew was not entered without specific invitation. The girl came in with her hair neat, and her apron straight, and her face composed in the way of a woman who had learned to compose it under pressure. She stood in the middle of the room and waited. Helena looked at her hands. The ring was not visible. She could see the faint line of the cord at her neck. "I should like to see your ring," Helena said. The girl's hand went to her neckline. She drew out the cord, and the ring came with it. She held it toward the older woman. Helena looked at it. The garnet caught the gray December light. She did not touch it. "Where did you come by it?" she said. "From my mother," the girl said. "She left it to me at her death. I have carried it for 11 years. "Your mother's name?" "Agnes Whitfield." Helena had not needed the name. She had known from the face, in some part of herself, that she had not been prepared to acknowledge in the corridor 2 days prior. This girl had Agnes's straight posture, and Agnes's dark eyes, and Agnes's manner of being still in a room without disappearing into the walls. She had needed to hear the name said all the same. She sat down. The girl remained standing. "Your mother," Helena said after a moment, "came to this house when you were 3 years old. You did not come with her. She did not tell us of you. She worked in this house for 2 years, and she was among the best people I have had the care of. And when she died, I gave her the ring because I did not know what else to do with grief that had no other form. I believed it was buried with her." Nora's face was very still. Only her hand was not. Her fingers closed around the ring on its cord and did not tighten, but held it, the way one holds something one is afraid of losing. She said, the girl said, that it came from a good house. It did, Helena said. It came from this one. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people processing information that required time. She left you a letter, Helena said. Not a question. Yes. She would have. A pause. She was careful with what mattered to her. What Helena did not say, and what she would not say until much later, was that she had written to Agnes once, 2 years after Agnes left service, to ask after her health. The letter had been returned unopened. She had assumed Agnes had moved, or died, or wished for no further contact. She had not pressed. She had believed, ever since, that there were kindnesses one offers and loses. She had not known there was a child. She had not known the child was in her own house. Edmund's wound was older than his wife's death, though Charlotte's death had confirmed it. He had been a man of 30 when he married, deliberate in his choices and certain of his competence, and what the marriage had taught him in 4 years was that competence was not sufficient company for a woman who needed warmth. He had provided for Charlotte. He had respected her. He had been absent from her in every way that mattered, not through cruelty, but through the specific form of cowardice that presents itself as efficiency, as a state business, as duty. She had gone into her confinement alone because he had been in London and had believed himself necessary there. He had not been necessary there. He had been afraid. He had not named it to himself as fear at the time, but he had been afraid of the intimacy of a birth, of being needed in a way that efficiency could not serve, and he had manufactured necessity rather than stay. Charlotte had died. The child had not survived her. He had gone abroad for 4 years because the house felt like an accusation, and he had come back because Cecily needed him to come back. And he had run the estate with the careful distance of a man who has learned that closeness costs more than he knew how to pay. None of this was visible on his face when she was shown into the study. What was visible was the particular stillness he adopted when a conversation required information he did not yet possess. He had been given Mrs. Price's account of the ring, and he had formed from it the account Mrs. Price had offered. A temporary maid in possession of jewelry that did not fit her position, which was a concern of household order and potentially, though he hoped not, of a more serious nature. He did not want it to be more serious. He had not examined why he did not want that. Mrs. Price has brought a matter to my attention, he said. Nora stood at the appropriate distance from his desk and looked at him with the composed face she had maintained through the corridor and the wait and the opening of the door. Yes, my lord. A ring. Worn, she says, without leave. It is my mother's ring, my lord. I was in error to wear it during my hours of duty. I have put it away. She says it is not the sort of ring a woman in your position would have by ordinary means. A pause. She is not wrong about that. He waited. My mother worked in a house, Nora said, where the mistress was kind to her. The ring was given to her by that mistress. She was not a woman who came by fine things easily. She was given it, and it was hers, and she left it to me. She did not say which house. She did not know, then, that she did not need to. He looked at her. He looked at the line of the cord at her throat, where the ring was hidden. He thought of Agnes Whitfield, which was a name he did not know, and he thought of his mother's face in the corridor as Garton had described it, the sudden whiteness of it, and he did not yet put those two things together. You understand, he said, that without further evidence of the ring's provenance, this house's position is compromised. I understand that I am a maid with a ring I cannot readily explain, Nora said, and her voice did not waver, but her hands clasped once at her sides, and then were still. If you require me to leave the position, my lord, I will leave it. I have not said that. You have not said anything else. It was not insolence. He understood that, though it had the shape of insolence. It was the precision of a woman who had calculated the distance between what was being said and what was being meant, and had named it because she did not have the luxury of pretending otherwise. He looked at her for a moment. He thought of the library. He thought of natural philosophy on the wrong shelf. He thought of Cecily's fever and what Garton had told him about who had sat through the night. You will remain at Fenwick Hall, he said, until this matter is resolved. She left. He sat with the unresolved matter and found, to his confusion, that what he felt was not impatience. Mrs. Price had been in service for 30 years. She had come up through 4 households and had managed the last 2 to the considerable satisfaction of their respective employers, and what she had learned in 30 years was that a household was a structure, and a structure required its pieces to remain in their positions. She was not a cruel woman. She was a precise one. When she told Edmund that afternoon that she had been right to bring the matter forward, that a maid of work who possessed jewelry above her station and was reluctant to account for it, clearly was a maid who could not be relied upon to remain in her proper position, she meant it as a structural observation, not a personal attack. She was, as the more forgiving version of herself might have acknowledged, not without her sympathies. The girl was just a maid, had always been just a maid, and a maid who had caught the attention of Lady Cecily, and who wore a ring she could not explain, and who had apparently looked Lord Fenwick in the eye and spoken plainly, was a maid who would require careful management. She had said as much in the servants' hall when Garton raised an eyebrow at her report. The girl is just a maid who has forgotten herself, she had said. It is a common enough confusion when a house is kind. She had not considered that the kindness might be warranted. She did not know what Lady Helena had discovered in the east parlor. She did not know until the following morning, when Lord Fenwick called them all. It was not a formal gathering. It was the hall outside the study door, at 11 in the morning, in the particular arrangement of a household whose lord has something to communicate and wishes witnesses present. Mrs. Price and Garton and 2 of the upper servants, Nora, who had been sent for again, and who stood at the back of the small group with her hands quiet at her sides. Lady Helena was there. The solicitor, Mr. Holt, who had arrived that morning from Bath, was there. Edmund stood at the study door. He had a letter in his hand. Nora had not seen the letter before, but she recognized the oilcloth it had been drawn from, because she had one exactly like it in the small box in her room. Lady Helena had written to the same solicitor's clerk who had attended Agnes Whitfield's burial. He had kept his records. He had kept the original instruction that had accompanied the small box of Agnes's effects, which was a letter from Agnes herself, dated a week before her death, directing that the box be delivered to her daughter, Nora, currently residing at the Whitfield Charity School in Somerset. The instruction had been witnessed. The clerk had retained a copy. He had brought it. Edmund looked at Nora. He looked at her with the expression she had not seen on him before, the one that was the mask falling away from a face that had kept it in place for a long time. Agnes Whitfield, he said, worked in this household for 2 years, ending in 1801. She was respected here. She died of an illness contracted in the service of this house. It was my mother who attended her burial, my mother who left her the ring. The hall was entirely quiet. "She had a daughter," Edmund said. "The daughter is standing in this hall." Mrs. Price's face did something complicated. "Nora Whitfield," Edmund said, "is Agnes Whitfield's daughter. She remains at Fenwick Hall. Not as a maid who had forgotten herself. Not as a temporary arrangement that had exceeded its term. As a person whose name had been spoken aloud in this house, in front of witnesses, by the man whose word here was final." He said it without flourish and without heat. The words were short and specific, and they could not be unsaid. Nora heard them. She had thought, standing in that hall, that she was prepared for the two outcomes she could see. She was not prepared for this one. She thought of her mother's letter. The ring came from a good house, from a kind heart. You should wear it without shame. She had worn it with shame for most of the morning, and she resolved, precisely then, not to do so again. Mrs. Price said nothing. She had the expression of a woman who had been precisely wrong, and knew it, and was computing the distance between what she had said and what she now knew to be true. The computation was not short. Garton nodded, with the neat nod of a man who files information and proceeds. Lady Helena watched Nora from across the hall. Her expression was not triumphant. It was the expression of a woman who has waited for something to resolve itself correctly, and has seen it do so, and is feeling grief and relief in the same breath, because the thing that resolved correctly is connected to a thing that cannot be undone. Edmund dismissed the gathering. He did not dismiss Nora. When the hall was empty, and the solicitor had retreated to the study with the letters, and Lady Helena had gone to the east parlor, he stood at the study door and looked at the maid his household had nearly turned out of doors. She was looking at the ring on its cord, which she had drawn out without thinking. "You did not know," he said, "whose house this was, when you came here." "I knew nothing of the house I came from," Nora said, "only that my mother had worked in one. She worked here well," he said. "My mother valued her." A pause. "I am told you sat through the night with Lady Cecily. She was frightened. She told me you read to her." "Natural philosophy," Nora said. "The chapter on atmospheric conditions. I thought it might distract her." He looked at her, and something in his face that had been very still was not entirely still anymore. "Did it?" "She fell asleep in the middle of the cloud formations," Nora said. "I think the barometric pressure was what did it." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Thank you." It was not a declaration. It was not a crossing of rooms, not a hand offered, not a name claimed in front of witnesses. It was two words from a man who had not said them easily in 4 years, and who knew it, and who looked at her as he said them with the gray eyes that had looked through servants for 3 months, and were looking at a person, specifically, and without the glass between. She felt it in her hands first, a warmth at the fingertips that had nothing to do with the temperature of the hall. She understood then that she was in some difficulty. The letter she wrote that evening was to the solicitor's clerk in Somerset, asking for whatever further documentation he held. She did not know what she was asking for, exactly. She only knew that her mother had told her she was owed nothing by anyone and everything by herself. And she was beginning to understand that to claim the second half of that sentence required knowing who she was. She was Agnes Whitfield's daughter. She was, it turned out, in a house that had known her mother and valued her. She wore the ring on her finger that evening and did not take it off. The weeks that followed arranged themselves around a new geometry. Nora had not been repositioned in the household structure in any formal sense. She remained in the rooms she had occupied, She continued to perform the functions she had been hired to perform, and no one altered her duties in any official document. What changed was the way the household moved around her, the way a river reroutes when a stone is placed in a different position. Garton spoke to her as though her answers were worth listening to. The under-housemaid who had treated her with indifferent efficiency treated her now with cautious courtesy. Mrs. Price, who would not humble herself verbally if there were any alternative available, simply began to behave as though the previous week had been a page that had turned and could not be returned to. Cecily, who had known none of it, took the news of Nora's history with the equanimity of a young woman who had long suspected the world was more complicated than its arrangements admitted. She simply moved over on the window seat when Nora came with the morning tray and asked for the second volume of the Meteorological Encyclopedia. Edmund was careful. He was careful in the way that a man is careful when he has noticed something he has not yet named to himself, and has chosen precision as the appropriate response. He continued to speak to her when their paths crossed. He asked, with the economy of a man who asks only what he genuinely wishes to know, how she was settling. He asked after her correspondence with the solicitor. He asked, on a gray December afternoon in the corridor outside the library, whether she had found the second volume herself, or whether Garton had been required. "I found it," she said. "She will have finished it by Thursday." "Wednesday, I think." He looked at her. He had the expression he had worn in the library, the first morning, when he had not corrected her and had told her about the additional volumes. It was not a warm expression. It was the expression of a man who is accustomed to a particular kind of distance and is finding it less habitable than it was. He said, "You have her manner." She did not ask who he meant. She had understood by then that he had known Agnes Whitfield at the periphery of his boyhood, that she had been the household's nurse in his younger brother's illness, that she had been present in this house at a particular unhappy time and had been, by all accounts, steady. "People have said she was steady," Nora said. "She was," he said. "I was 12 when she came. I remember it because my brother was very ill and she stayed." She looked at him. He was looking at the corridor wall, at the old painting above the side table, with the expression of someone accessing a room they do not often open. "She stayed," Nora said. "Yes." He looked back at her. "She stayed until it resolved. As it happened, it resolved well. He is in Bristol now. He does not know she is gone." "I will tell you," Nora said, "if you like, what I know of her. The letter. The few things the clerk knew. It is not much." He was quiet for a moment. "I would like that," he said. His voice was very level. "When you are ready." She thought of her mother's words. A good house. A kind heart. She thought that Agnes Whitfield had known something about this place that Nora was only beginning to see. It was Cecily who named it first, in the guileless manner of a girl who has not yet learned to leave things unnamed. "He looks at you differently," Cecily said on the afternoon she finished the Meteorological Encyclopedia and began casting about for its successor. "Lord Fenwick, he did not used to look at anyone differently." Nora said nothing. "I do not mean it as a fault," Cecily said. "I mean it as information." "Information I do not require," Nora said, which was not precisely true. "He looked at my sister differently, at the beginning," Cecily said, in the quieter voice she used when she mentioned Charlotte. "Not like this, though. Charlotte was the kind of person people look at because she demanded it. You are the kind of person people look at because they cannot help it." She went back to her encyclopedia search and left the observation in the air between them. where it settled without Nora's permission. The afternoon he came to the east parlor where she was sitting with Cecily and his mother, she had been reading aloud from the encyclopedia's chapter on river formation, and the reading was not disrupted by his arrival. And after a moment he sat down near the fire and did not leave. And the chapter concluded at 3 o'clock, and tea was brought. And Lady Helena watched her son over the rim of her cup with an expression that was not quite a smile, but contained its bones. He stayed for an hour. When he left, he passed close enough to Nora's chair that she could feel the warmth of him. And he paused, not long enough to be remarked upon, and said, "The chapter on tidal patterns is in the 3rd volume." "I know," she said. "She will want it next." "I have already put it on the tray," she said. He looked down at her with the gray eyes that were not behind glass anymore. "Yes," he said. "I thought you might have." He left. Cecily and Lady Helena did not say anything. They did not need to. The formal accounting came in January in the way of Regency formal accountings, which is to say it came through Mr. Holt, who had done further work in the solicitor's records and had arrived with documents confirming that Agnes Whitfield had been the natural daughter of a minor Dorset gentleman who had died in 1796, without acknowledgement of her specifically, but who had left a small trust in the hands of a religious charity, from which Agnes had received £20 annually, and from which, upon Agnes's death, the remaining sum was to pass to any living descendants. It was not a fortune. It was £37 and the ring. Edmund had Mr. Holt present this in the study, in his presence, and in Lady Helena's, and in Nora's, and when Mr. Holt was done, Edmund said, without looking at the papers, "The trust is correct. Miss Whitfield will also receive a position in this household, commensurate with her record and her history here. We can discuss the particulars with Mrs. Price." Nora looked at him. "You do not have to offer that," she said. "No," he said. "I do not have to." There was a pause that was not empty. "We can discuss the particulars," she said, "when you have thought them through." "I have thought them through," he said. He looked at her with the direct gray look that she had stopped misreading as coldness. "I have had several weeks." Lady Helena found a reason to speak to Mr. Holt about a separate matter in the far corner of the room, and exercised the discretion of a woman who understood exactly what she was enabling. The conversation that followed was not long. He told her that his mother had spoken highly of what she had seen in the night of Cecily's fever. He told her that he had made his own observations. He told her that Fenwick Hall was a house that required, in his estimation, someone steady, in the long term, and that he was aware this was a peculiar way of expressing something he might have expressed more directly, but that he had not spoken directly in some time, and was working back toward it. She told him that she was aware of that. He told her that he was prepared, if she was willing, to work toward it together. She thought of the letter. "What I had served me well enough, and I hope it serves you better." She thought of a woman who had worked in this house for 2 years, and had been known here and valued, and had left with the ring of a good woman's kindness against her skin. "Yes," she said. "I think so." He looked at her hands. The ring was on her finger. He did not reach for it. He was careful still, and would be careful for some time, because careful was what he had, and honesty was what he was working back toward. He looked at the ring with the expression of a man who is seeing a circle completed, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who has finally read all the letters she was given. January became February. In February, there was a quiet announcement. It was made in the way of the period's quiet announcements, which is to say it was made to Mr. Holt and to the vicar, and to Lady Helena, who had expected it. and to Cecily, who had expected it before anyone else, and who responded by asking Nora what she thought of the title chapter in the 4th volume, which had arrived from Bath. The library was used differently in the evenings. After that, Edmund brought his correspondence there rather than to the study. And Nora read to Cecily in the far chair, and Lady Helena sat near the fire with her needlework. And the house had the particular sound that houses make when they have been quiet for a long time and have been given something to contain again. One evening in early March, Cecily fell asleep mid-chapter, as was her habit, and Lady Helena retired, and the library was left to the fire and the 2 people who remained in it. Edmund had set down his correspondence. Nora had set down her book. The ring caught the firelight from across the room, the small garnet dark and warm in its plain gold setting, exactly as it had been on a gray morning in December, when it had arrested a woman in a corridor and started everything that came after. She would have liked this, Nora said, I think. He looked at the ring. My mother says she would have found it inevitable. Nora looked at him. And you? I find, he said after a moment, in the voice that was leveling toward warmth, that was still finding the distance between what he meant and what he permitted himself to say, that I no longer find it useful to resist things that are inevitable. She looked at the fire. She thought that this was a man who had spent 4 years resisting things and had come back to an empty house and had found, entirely without planning, a maid who read natural philosophy and stayed through fevers and wore a ring that his mother had last pressed into the hands of a woman buried in the churchyard on the hill. She thought of her mother's words. A good house, from a kind heart. She thought that Agnes Whitfield had been right about both. The fire had burned low. Outside the library windows, the first pale suggestion of March was in the darkness, a degree more light than January had allowed, a degree more warmth than February had held. The ring was on her hand. The letter, answered at last, was on the desk in her room, folded carefully, as Agnes had folded hers. If her story has stayed with you, leave a word in the comments. Stories find the people who need them, and we are grateful you were here for this one. She turned the ring on her finger, once in the warmth of the fire, and Edmund watched her do it, and neither of them said anything more because nothing more was needed. That was enough. That, for the first time in a long time, was exactly enough.